right, well, joining me on the line today is Sama'a Al-Hamdani. She is an independent Yemen analyst, and she has quite a bit to say about what's happening right now in Yemen. Sama'a, it's great to have you on the program. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You know, Sama'a, I found you recently on a very interesting interview on Russia Today where you were breaking down what's actually happening in Yemen. You know, here in America, so few of us really fully comprehend what's happening there, and many of us don't even know that there is something happening there because the media has been so quiet about the fact that Saudi Arabia has, along with its coalition of partners, has been doing a lot of damage, not only to Yemeni country, but as well as much of the infrastructure there. Can you tell us a little bit about why this is happening, and maybe for our folks who don't even really know what's happening in Yemen, how all this got started?
Yeah, absolutely. So Yemen is at the tip of the Arabian Peninsula. It's right underneath, south of Saudi Arabia. So it is the bordering country to Saudi Arabia and Oman. And it is the neighbor of Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia has a lot of interest in Yemen for many, many years. The war that we're looking at now is a kind of a structured war that has two wars to it. The first is regional, and the second one is a Yemeni war within. So prior to all of this, we had a Houthi rebel group that now we call militia. It is a militia, in fact. However, there are many, many militias in Yemen. They're not the only militia that has taken over the government and expanded all over the northern part of the country. What happened is that this group kept on expanding and moving forward, and it seems to have angered Saudi Arabia. So right now, we have two wars. The first war is of the Saudi-led coalition, which is composed of 10 countries, sending airstrikes all over the military bases of Yemen and targeting certain Houthi locations. But then within Yemen, there's a Yemeni war that's taken place in the south of Yemen, mainly in the Aden governorate of Yemen. And there you have the Houthi militia lashing out and shooting in all directions against the southern Adani people of Yemen. So the reason I need to clarify here quickly that prior to 1990, Yemen used to be two countries. One is the north of Yemen, the other one is the south of Yemen, and they've merged since. In 1994, we had a civil war there where the north managed to keep hold of the southern portion, and Yemen continued to be one country. Right now, you have the Houthis lashing out and reacting against the south out of vengeance of what's happening in the north of Yemen. So the more Saudis launch airstrikes in the north, the more these Houthi militia groups are killing and destroying people in the south. And so it's a very odd situation because these airstrikes were supposed to curb the influence of this militia. However, it's clear that they haven't managed to do so. And it's obvious because these airstrikes have lasted for more than 2 weeks now. They've completely demolished military bases. They've targeted a lot of airports. Saudi Arabia and the 9 countries with it have managed to control Yemeni airspace. It's a no-fly zone, and they've sealed all the ports. The problem with this is that it's functioning as a form of siege, meaning that the people are struggling to have services come in. And Yemen is a very, very poor country. More than 50% of the people are living under the poverty line, and they depend a lot on financial aid and on food aid that is coming into the country. And none of that has been allowed in. Some people managed to get in. I think the International Red Cross managed to send some doctors by sea into Yemen, into Aden, to save some of the people there because the bodies are piling up. The hospitals are overwhelmed with the amount of patients that are coming in, and they're not equipped to take all of this on. The problem with this attack is that it hasn't stopped. We haven't even reached a 24-hour humanitarian ceasefire, which is extremely necessary at this point.
Yeah, the stories that we're hearing, of course, in the West are very limited, but from what I've been able to gather, the civilian death toll is really concerning. It seems to be rising dramatically, and it seems as if there is no call, or at least a legitimate call, for Saudi Arabia to be more careful in its bombing. Are you seeing that as well? Is that what you're noticing? I mean, is that a problem right now?
Well, I think the biggest problem right now is that we don't have a source of verifying what is happening on the ground. The country has no Western journalists whatsoever, no Arab journalists either. They only have Yemeni journalists, and the problem with Arab media is it's completely political. So, for example, Arab media would broadcast news that would benefit a faction of this conflict. So the news would either be 100% pro-Saudi Arabia, pro-airstrikes, saying that there are no casualties, that these targets are only targeting military sites, and that nobody's dying. And then on the other side, you have news that is saying that everybody's dying, it's complete chaos. And so you lack a source that's telling you the truth. And so for someone like me who's from Yemen, I have to go and call people that I know on the ground from every place just to get the facts. And so it's very bad because we know that people are dying. These airstrikes are, in fact, targeting some locations that are not related to the military. It has been confirmed that they've targeted some factories, dairy factories, cement factories, and we don't understand why they're targeting these places and why they can't even admit that they're targeting them. On the other side of that, we can't ignore the Yemeni fighting that's happening on the ground. And it's very clear that airstrikes are not going to curb that. And the biggest reason for that is that the Houthi group is a militia first and foremost. The first day that these airstrikes began, they targeted all the air bases. But the funny thing is that the Houthis never used these military bases to expand. They always expanded and pushed on the ground, and they actually used the youth of Yemen. So a lot of their fighters are young, and a lot of them are actually children under the age of 18.
What is the main fear here, Sama'a? Is the main fear from Saudi Arabia? Of course, Yemen sits on the border of Saudi Arabia. They also control, I guess, a strategic oil choke point right there on the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden there. Yep. Is that really the main concern of the Saudis? Is that why they're trying to tamper this down? Or are they concerned about the Houthi rebels maybe even moving into Saudi Arabia?
So Saudi Arabia is doing this for several reasons, really. What they are saying is that this is a response to a request made by President Hadi of Yemen. So President Hadi, his term expired in February 2014. However, he remained as president. So he stepped in as president in 2012 as part of a settlement that allowed the former president to step down. Yemen had a revolution in 2011. As a deal mediated by the Gulf Cooperation Council, former President Saleh agreed to step down, and his vice president, now President Hadi, became president. So he had time from 2012 to 2015 to really have a government and to change things. The people were extremely optimistic of his presence and were waiting for positive change. Unfortunately, President Hadi failed to deliver, and his government was the weakest government that Yemen has ever witnessed, north or south. And so it seems that he, at the very start, allowed these Houthi rebel group to expand from Sa'da, where they were originally, down south into Amran, and then into the Mad, and then into Sana'a. So the president kind of stood back and allowed them expand. And in January, he was put under house arrest, and then he fled to Aden in February. That's the southern city of Aden. So he fled further south. And when the Houthi group was expanding to the south of Yemen, that's when Saudi Arabia was fed up with them. So officially, they are responding to a request by President Hadi. But at the same time, they have a concern of Iranian support going to the Houthis. Of course, this amount of support is still debatable. Nobody can actually tell you to what extent has Iran supported these groups. What is known, though, is that Saudi Arabia has supported the government. They are the biggest donor to the Yemeni government and to other tribes and allies in Yemen. So they have the regional concern of Iranian expansion. They are worried about the Houthis expanding and pushing in. They have called them Shia. And of course, Saudi Arabia is the biggest Sunni country in the Arabian Peninsula. And I have to clarify here that the Houthi group, although the media calls them Shia, they're not actually Shia in the sense that Iran is Shia. What I mean by that is that Iran believes in a sect that is known as 12er Shia, and they have rituals and practices that the Zaydi Yemenis do not practice at all. The reason Iranians are called 12er Shia is because they believe in 12 imams. Yemenis are called 5er Shia. They believe only in the first 5 imams, and they're considered a group that deflected away from that. A few years ago, prior to the Saudi-Iranian proxy war, if you ask any 12er Shia if Zaydi Yemenis are Shia, they would say no. Because in practice, they are actually very similar to Shafi'i Sunni sect. And that's the reason that the Zaydis and the Sunnis in Yemen managed to coexist for many years. And so the sectarian angle is overplayed and is almost constructed for political motives to increase the turmoil within.
Yeah, it seems like that's what the media has been doing. They've been boiling this down to a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now, no doubt Iran does have interest in Yemen, no?
Yes, absolutely. Iran would have interest in Yemen. And I think the problem here, though, is the matter of proportionality. What I mean by that is if you look at the Iranian interference in Yemen, does it require this much of a strong response from Saudi Arabia and its coalition? And the reasonable answer is no. Of course, there's Iranian influence there, and of course the Saudis should worry about it because Yemen is their neighbor. But it did not require this massive airstrike. It seems to be that there is a personal angle there, meaning the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, granted former President Saleh immunity and allowed him to stay in Yemen as long as he does not participate in politics. Of course, old habits die hard, and former President Saleh could not help it but get involved. It seems that President Saleh had a vendetta against the new president, President Hadi, who was his vice president, and was trying to push him out. I don't think he understood in his political game that whatever he's doing would result in a consequence that is going to make 26 million Yemenis suffer. And of course, that's going to have to be his legacy. He completely destroyed whatever hope Yemen had. The only problem now with these airstrikes coming in, with Saudi Arabia coming into the political equation, is that it completely changes the balance of power in Yemen. So we had the government in Yemen, which was the weakest group. We have the Houthi militia. We have former President Saleh. We have the joint meeting parties, which is a coalition of all opposition parties. They've been very quiet and unable to perform in the past few months. And one of the parties in this joint meeting party is Islah, which was strong at first, but got significantly weaker as Saudi Arabia decided that they will not support the Muslim Brotherhood in the Middle East after the war in Syria. So Islah party in Yemen suffered as a consequence of that. And then we have in the south a southern separatist movement. And in the south also, we have Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and they have expanded to some northern territories in Marib and Al-Jawf. So we have all these players there operating on the ground, and the only legitimate force was the government. But the government resigned and was unable to perform. So they resigned in January, but even before that, they were unable to do anything, which meant that the Yemeni people on the ground had to seek other powers outside of the government for protection and to get services as well. So if we look at the sectarian conflict on the ground that's being constructed here, the Houthi is a political movement with ideological enemies. And the ideological enemies of the Houthi movement is Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And so with the Houthis weak and being targeted, the only group that is actually benefiting from all of this is Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. They have took over the presidential palace in the governorate of Hadramaut in Al-Mukalla city. They have also freed 300 prisoners there, and they have looted the Mukalla central bank for an amount that is around 100 million riyals, which is not that much because it's Yemeni riyals, but it is still a lot. They shouldn't have access to that money. And the funniest thing of all is that now Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has put a bounty for the heads of former President Saleh and for the leader of the Houthi movement, Abdul Malik al-Houthi. And the amount that they put out there is the equivalent of $700,000.
Wow. This is all heartbreaking, Sama'a, and I know if it's heartbreaking for me and of course for those who are watching this unfold here in America when we have no connection to, it must be very heartbreaking for you to see your country, facing this here. So in conclusion, tell us a little bit about your own personal feelings about this conflict and maybe what you would like for Westerners to know.
I think that my personal feelings always should stay outside of my actual analysis and opinion, and that's what I constantly try to do here. I look at all sides and I try to be objective and with reason. And so what I would ask the audience to do is to read all sides, to be very well informed. Yemen is a place that a lot of the experts talking about Yemen don't actually know much about. It's important to put some personal research or effort into this, but what's most important is to pay attention to the really deteriorating humanitarian crisis there. Outside of the politics, outside of the proxy war, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are starving, of people who don't have access to water. The next war is not going to be over politics. It's over who has water in Yemen. Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, is supposed to be the first capital in the world to run out of water. The people don't have electricity. They don't have freedom of movement. There's great inflation in the city right now. Nobody has access to gas. There are lines for people who are trying to get gas for their cars. And so 20 liters of gas has become worth $100 in the black market. And the poor people of Yemen cannot afford that. And so I would ask everyone to pay attention to the humanitarian crisis and to put the politics aside. When you have 26 million people who are suffering. It's time for world action and to say no to anything that's going to make their lives worse.
Oh, well said. It's a total humanitarian crisis in Yemen. My guest today has been Sama'a Al-Hamdani. She is an independent Yemen analyst. Sama'a, how can our listenership reach out to you? How can they learn more about you and your work?
Absolutely. I am on Twitter at Yemeniyati, which is Yemeniaty. And I have a website with the same name, www.yemeniyati.com. I have a lot of information about Yemen. And I'm sure if they just go online, on Twitter or on Facebook, if they research Yemen, there are a lot of people who are tweeting on Yemen as well.
Sama'a, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.